lunch diplomacy was sidetracked by what many took as the president taking the first step toward cutting his nominee to head the Department of Veterans Affairs loose amid questions about his conduct as head White House doctor. According to the president, Ronny Jackson may not need the headache of getting confirmed amid such nitpicky little questions like the ones laid out in the New York Times today. Specifically, quote, allegations that Jackson oversaw a hostile work environment as White House doctor, allowed the overprescribing of drugs, and possibly drank on the job. For his part, Jackson was on the Hill today at the same moment that the president expressed ambivalence about whether Jackson should stick it out.
Dr. Jackson, can you say anything at all about these allegations that have come out against you in the last few days?
No, I'll just say that I was looking forward to the hearing tomorrow. Kind of disappointed that it's been postponed, but I'm looking forward to getting a reschedule and answering everybody's questions.
You've seen the allegations, a hostile work environment, allegations about potentially drinking on the job, over-prescribing medications. Are you saying those are categorically untrue?
I'm saying I'm looking forward to the hearing so we can sit down and I can explain everything to everyone and answer all the senators' questions.
Moments after that exchange, the president seemed to give Jackson an out.
I said to Dr. Jackson, what do you need it for? So we'll see what happens. I don't want to put a man through who's not a political person. I don't want to put a man through a process like this. It's too ugly and too disgusting. So we'll see what happens. He'll make a decision.
So are you saying, Mr. President, that you will stand behind him?
I would definitely stand behind him. He's a fine man. I'll always stand behind him. I'd let it be his choice. If I were him, actually, in many ways, I'd love to be him. But the fact is, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. What does he need it for? To be abused by a bunch of politicians that aren't thinking nicely about our country? I really don't think personally he should do it, but it's totally his. I would stand behind him, totally his decision.
Said one of the most abusive politicians on the world stage. Here to help us break down a rather unexpected headline of the day, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Joining us from the Washington Post, White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker and Robert Costa, national political reporter and moderator of Washington Week. And with us at the table, Jonathan Lemire, Associated Press White House reporter, Eddie Glaude, professor with Princeton University, and Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy. Every last one of them, MSNBC analysts and contributors. Phil Rucker, let me start with you and some reporting in your paper that contradicts really the line that the president took today. And as you know from covering the president, that doesn't mean that both aren't true. But your colleague Josh Dawsey writes, the administration has not put its full weight behind Jackson's nomination, according to people familiar with the matter, appointing mid-level aides to oversee Jackson's briefing by VA experts and sending a junior media aide from the White House to help him make the rounds on Capitol Hill. With the recent departure of Darren Selnick, the White House's most seasoned experts on veterans issues, Trump has few aides with deep knowledge of how the agency works. He was walking into an ambush, a veterans advocate close to the White House said of the Senate hearing. He is just not ready. Phil?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Look, the White House has put a lot of muscle behind Mike Pompeo's nomination for Secretary of State. He cleared that committee vote yesterday and is expected to be confirmed by the full Senate soon. But we've not seen a similar effort yet, at least for Dr. Ronny Jackson with his nomination to the VA. In part, though, this is sort of a problem of the White House's own making. There was not an effort to really vet him before President Trump made that nomination. Trump knows Jackson very well. He's been his physician, personal physician at the White House for a while now. They have a close bond and relationship. And he thought he'd be a good fit at the VA without looking into his background, without doing some of the necessary spade work that, as you know, White Houses traditionally do when they're putting forth cabinet nominees.
And this is indeed a story about vetting, but I want to start with how Ronny Jackson likely earned a spot deep inside the president's heart. Let's watch Ronny Jackson at that Donald Trump health briefing back in January, Robert Costa, and talk about it on the other side.
With President Trump's consent, I released the following health information. Vitals as follows. Age 71 years and 7 months at the time of the exam. Height 75 inches. Weight 239 pounds. Some people have, just great genes. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old. I don't know. If he had some type of mental cognitive issue that this test is sensitive enough, it would pick up on it. He would not have got 30 out of 30 on the test.
His weight, I think he said 239, right? I think it's just shy of obesity,
it
right?
Is, yeah.
So you're confident of that number?
I've lied about my weight, so I'm not going to pass any judgment here, Robert Costa, but this was sort of the moment when he rose to prominence and sort of, I think, a public outside of the White House staff, and the president first knew who he was. Talk about his journey from sort of the kind of performance that the president loves in that briefing room to the nominee to run arguably one of the more important federal agencies, certainly one that affects the lives of the people who have given the most to this country.
Based on my conversations with White House officials, there is a visceral, personal connection between Dr. Jackson and President Trump. Dr. Jackson has had a warm relationship with many presidents over the years, but when you see his adopting the language of the president, a phrase the president often uses, great genes, taken up by the doctor at the White House lectern. You also see as the president at times has grown more isolated inside of the West Wing, turning more to friends and confidants from his business career. He's also turning to people around him who he truly trusts, like Dr. Jackson, not necessarily lawmakers or outside advisors. And Dr. Jackson was present. He was a constant at the side of President Trump. And so when it came time to move on from Shulkin, he was there. He seemed like an obvious choice.
And just having worked in the White House doctor isn't by your side in case you need something or to suck up. The White House doctor is by your side in case you fall ill, in case, heaven forbid, something happens to you, in case you're in a car accident, in case the motor. I mean, the sort of the simplicity, and I accept and agree with how he ended up being the nominee for VA. But it's just a ludicrous sort of chain of events that he was in the president's sort of line of sight, and he said he can do it.
That's right. I mean, right now we're seeing, certainly the talk is about these allegations of misconduct by Dr. Jackson, when really the story all along has been...
Do you have any additional reporting on that?
There's just chatter. The AP has not verified some of these allegations that we're seeing. We know that there's some lawmakers on Capitol Hill who have been alarmed by what was said, and they're looking for more information. But it points to the fact there wasn't a real vetting at the White House. And the talk now also seems to almost be overshadowing the fact that Dr. Jackson was wildly unqualified for this job.
So let's hit pause, because before this story broke, this was the problem with this nomination. He was viewed, Jim Messina was here, who worked for President Obama as his deputy chief of staff, and said he's a wonderful doctor.
Yes.
He's the worst choice to run the VA.
That's right. I mean, I believe the VA is the second largest federal agency, and certainly, as you just very rightly said, these are people who need the services for the VA, or the people who have given the most for this country. They deserve the best. This is also a president who, on the campaign trail, made Veterans Affairs issues a pretty signature issue, and sort of every day went back, sort of vowed, we'll clean this up, and then obviously ousted his first Veterans Affairs Commissioner, Mr. Shulkin, and then made this very surprising choice. Someone who, yes, he enjoys a good rapport with, who people in the Obama White House also vouched for personally, but has no experience of any sort of management of an organization anywhere near this size.
And it shows Donald Trump's disdain for bureaucracy and institutions. He ran a little candy store family business. He doesn't understand. The VA has 377,000 employees. That's probably 150 times the number of employees he's ever had. He has no respect for people who have bureaucratic abilities. I know I'm sounding so dull. I'm praising bureaucrats. but it's a real skill set. Well, and this is the toughest bureau to manage in the whole federal government.
And let's not be glib on the question. This is a bureaucracy where lives hang in the balance.
Absolutely.
The waiting list for services for TBI and for PTSD, literally lives depend on how that bureaucracy functions. Let me turn to you, though, on vetting, and let me show you some of the concerns Democrats have expressed about just the broader picture of vetting for this Trump White House.
I think the vetting on a number of individuals who actually were confirmed was deficient.
Probably makes sense for the president to spend a little bit more time doing research on his own nominees before he sends them to Congress.
So it's disappointing to see that we're being sent folks that are often, for many jobs, are profoundly unqualified.
The vetting here, unfortunately, typically of the White House in other instances as well, has been really abysmal, neglectful, careless, and I think a disservice to Admiral Jackson.
And it started with Mike Flynn, who was in trouble before he ever walked through the Northwest Gate. It continues with this sort of, I mean, Rachel Maddow has a wall for all of the departures from this administration. Why can't anyone get their arms around the vetting process?
I think for some reason people have given him a pass on this in the initial stages, right? So it wasn't just simply Michael Flynn, it was Jared Kushner's, it was Wilbur Ross, it was Scott Pruitt, it was Betsy DeVos. I mean, we just go down the line. And what we see here is that the standard is comfort, not competence. Right? How comforting are you to Donald Trump, as opposed to whether or not you actually have the skill set to do the job that is required in the position. And so because we're constantly trying to, shall we say, provide a reason or provide a context for this child, this man-child to function, right? We're constantly giving people buys. We're constantly giving them passes. And then we find ourselves...
Well, we're not.
Well, I mean, but you think about, so we can blame the White House. But many of these folks were actually pushed through.
But here's my question.
Many of these folks were pushed through.
Who's gone through the vetting process and the Senate confirmation process, right? Who, when you're going into the State Department, you have to go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You have to answer this question. Every foreign country you've been to for the last 14 years, every foreigner you talked to on that trip, and how many drinks you had each day. Believe it or not, that's still on the form. How these guys are getting through the vetting process, I don't know.
Well,
somebody in the White House is saying, speed it up.
Let's look at Phil Rucker. Can you speak to that? I mean, I think you go to Rob the Porter scandal. I mean, either they're not filling out the forms accurately, they're lying on forms, which I believe is a crime to lie on a federal background check, or people who are in receipt of these forms are brushing. I mean, what is the actual technical way that these candidates who are unqualified are getting through?
Well, the vetting is just not as thorough as it was in past White Houses. There is one aspect of the vetting that's quite thorough in the Trump White House, and it's the review of sort of what the nominees or potential nominees have said in the past about Trump. So there's a pretty thorough check of their Twitter archive, of their Facebook archive. Did they support another candidate in the Republican primaries? Were they signing Never Trump letters? Yeah, that matters a lot to this president, and there are people who are considered for jobs who don't get through because of that. But I think it's also important for us all to remember that the Senate plays a key role in the vetting. Trump today talked about how this process is dirty and unfair, and the politicians in the Senate are tearing apart his nominee, Jackson. But it's not quite that. They're doing their constitutional duty to provide oversight of the executive branch. It's their job to vet candidates for these executive positions and render their own judgment about them.
Let me just go. Robert Costa, I accept the analysis that most scandals in Washington don't damage Donald Trump's brand, but bringing in the best people and running the federal government like a successful business is essential to his brand as anything. It is now abundantly clear through dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of unethical and unqualified people that that is not true. Is there anyone in the president's orbit who believes that the incompetence narrative, the lack of an ability to attract top-tier talent to the president's White House and administration is something that they have to keep an eye on? Is that at least registering as a flashing yellow light for anyone around this president?
It's an interesting question, and politically, no, Nicole, because they don't think inside of this White House that voters are going to make a decision in the midterm elections based on cabinet nominees and the cabinet nomination process. However, there is a legislative cost. Based on my reporting, you have Republicans on Capitol Hill saying to this White House right now, stop with this upheaval of the cabinet. We can only process so much. Pompeo for Secretary of State's enough of a challenge. Haspel for CIA. Now Ronnie Jackson has problems with his nomination. They're telling the White House, calm down with these nominees. There's already enough on the plate legislatively. Got to burrow down for the midterm elections.
You know, following up on Phil's point, I mean, he's exactly right that the candidates are screened whether they've criticized the president or not. Another key point here is we know this. The president likes people who look the part. Dr. Ronnie Jackson does. I mean, he cut a pretty demanding, like pretty imposing figure there at the podium. He delivered a, for the most part, memorable press conference.
Yep.
And but if these allegations are true,
honestly, anyone that said that I weighed, less than I do would get any job they wanted.
That's totally right. And if the allegations are true, that if there are suggestions that he was drinking on the job, that might explain that press conference to suggest that Donald Trump is 239 pounds.
Listen, I traveled all over the world with the president's physicians, Dr. Tubb, and he was a revered, and I totally accept the White House reporting from Robert and Phil that he picks people he's comfortable with, and the White House physician is about the person with whom you are the most comfortable. If you land on a foreign